lot of people have sort of kept faith with the president. There's been a logic to a lot of what he has done, and he's had a lot of support from his senators and his administration on his course of action trying to get people to the negotiating table. I think that is starting to fragment because of the pause to assistance and particularly intelligence sharing. He's had a lot of criticism from quite a number of Republican senators.
This time last week, you will remember that we had the shocking showdown between Presidents Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office. That evident rift between the leaders was widened on Monday night when Donald Trump paused the shipments of military equipment to Ukraine, which was in turn followed up on Wednesday with confirmation that the US had paused intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Yesterday, Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy, General Keith Kellogg, was asked to explain why they'd taken these measures.
The best way I can describe it is sort of like hitting a mule with a 2x4 across the nose. You got their attention, and it is significant, obviously, because of the support that we give. Okay, but it's one way to get your attention to do it. But it's a pause. It's not an end, and it's then up to them to do it. And I know that the allied partners that has anything to do with U.S. support as well are kind of paused as well. So anytime as a military person, anytime you displace assets, primarily from the intelligence community, it's pretty significant.
Well, President Zelensky posted on X on Monday saying last week's meeting had been regrettable. And in the last hour, speaking from the Oval Office, Donald Trump said this when he was asked if Russia was taking advantage of the US pause in intelligence support for Ukraine.
I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them. And I think probably anybody in that position would be doing that right now. He wants to get it ended, and I think Ukraine wants to get it ended, but I don't see, it's crazy. They're taking tremendous punishment. I don't quite get it, but I suspect, Michael, he probably wants to get it ended.
Well, officials from both sides are due to take part in talks in Saudi Arabia next week. Hard to know where to begin. Penny, let me begin with you, because we had that post on Truth Social, which Donald Trump was talking about sanctions on Russia. He didn't really follow through on that in the Oval Office. He started talking about how, he trusted Putin wanted peace. He understood why Putin was doing what he was doing. So he didn't really sort of follow up on that as perhaps Ukraine might have wanted him to. But where are we in the world order and in Trump's world order?
Well, it's very brave of you, Cathy, to tune in to the Oval Office since having had what happened last week. Look, I think
I was getting a bit of PTSD. I don't know about you.
I know. Look, I think a lot of people have sort of kept faith with the president. There's been a logic to a lot of what he has done, and he's had a lot of support from his senators and his administration on his course of action trying to get people to the negotiating table. I think that is starting to fragment because of the pause to assistance and particularly intelligence sharing. He's had a lot of criticism from quite a number of Republican senators, including Lindsey Graham, who was, after last week's incident in the Oval Office, extremely supportive and loyal of the president. But even he has said that he has concerns around this. And Russia are exploiting this. I mean, in the last 24 hours, we've had really an escalation of attacks on Odessa port, on energy infrastructure. Civilians have been killed, including a number of children. And it seems that, unsurprisingly, Putin is really exploiting this additional vulnerability that the Ukrainians have. The onus now is on the president. He has got everything he wants. He's got everyone where he wants them. He now has to come up with the goods and bring Russia to the negotiating table. But we seem a long way off a ceasefire or prisoners being returned or all those many, many children who were abducted and taken into Russia being brought home. So it's a depressing situation, but the president now has really got to come up with the goods.
And do you think that opposition amongst some of his Republican colleagues might have informed what seemed to be a slight change of tack today from Donald Trump?
Well, look, he sent out that tweet. The clip you've just shown from the Oval Office, he was very keen to talk about domestic priorities. He would, when he was asked about Ukraine, he would pivot back onto the domestic agenda and point to his successes there. But really, Ukraine is absolutely central to what is on his desk now. And Russia does not seem to be responding in the way that perhaps he would have hoped. And if this continues, if Russia continues to exploit this additional weakness that Ukraine has, then he's got to take some kind of action, because it's monstrous what is taking place.
George Fuchs.
I think Penny's a little more optimistic than I am. President Trump changed his mind from one day to the next a week or so ago. Now he's changing his mind within a day on tariffs. They're on at the beginning of the day and off at the end of the day, as far as Canada and Mexico is concerned. And I thought he couldn't be trumped, as it were. You couldn't trump Trump with outlandish statements until J.D. Vance then spoke about some random country who haven't fought wars for 20 or 30 years, and meaning either France or the United Kingdom. When we and all the other countries went to their aid under Section 5 of the NATO treaty after 9/11, and 457 British people were killed fighting in Afghanistan in support of the Americans. It is really outrageous, the things that they are saying and doing. And all that I am really grateful for is that we have a really impressive Prime Minister at the moment with Keir Starmer. Imagine if it had been Boris Johnson or Liz Truss in charge, the chaos that it would have been over the last few weeks.
Penny, do you agree that Keir Starmer's doing a good job?
So look, I think on the talk softly, carry a big stick test, on the talk softly, the Prime Minister's doing really well. I think he's had some really good diplomatic triumphs. And I think that the summit at the weekend was excellent in terms of moving Europe into the right place to step up on defence. Where I want to see more is on the big stick. And he has announced some more defence spending, but we have to do a lot more. We really do need an emergency defence preparation programme. George Robertson will shortly come forward with his defence review. I'm quite sure it will look at many of these issues. But we have to find at least an extra 20 billion. And that sounds a tall order. We're carrying a lot of debt. Our public services are still recovering from the legacy of the pandemic. But we have to find it, because if we do not, we will not be able to mount the kind of show of force that is going to deter Putin from future action.
But we are finding it, and we're not finding it at the moment out of taxpayers' money. We're finding it out of frozen Russian assets, and particularly on the interest on that.
Well, George, I want to come on to that in just a bit, because I do want to sort of segue into what's happening in Europe, because this breakdown in relations across the Atlantic has made the efforts to find a European response all the more urgent. So on Sunday, Keir Starmer hosted a summit of European leaders in London, where he announced plans to provide troops on the ground in Ukraine after the war ends.
We will go further, develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace.
Earlier in the week, Friedrich Merz, who's expected to become the next German Chancellor, announced he'd do whatever it took to defend Europe, lifting the constitutional debt brake, which has previously limited the federal deficit. And European leaders met in Brussels yesterday, agreeing to significantly increase defence spending. George, were you encouraged by what you heard there, or is it, again, an instance where they're talking big, the EU and the UK indeed, but the action isn't there to underpin it? And won't be for several years.
It is there, and I was really encouraged. I mean, it's remarkable that this has united Europe in a way that I never expected, and it was really encouraging. We've seen Norway agree to double the amount of money they're spending. We've seen Turkey saying, we want to get in on the act. We want to be involved. And all 27 countries of the European Union yesterday agreed, including Hungary and Slovakia, which surprised me that they came in on it. And that was very, very effective. The other thing is, we're hearing now that the United States are withdrawing their intelligence help. French intelligence are still helping them, and also British intelligence. I was on the Intelligence and Security Committee for a number of years, and it's my view that GCHQ is better than its American equivalent.
Well, it hasn't done much good over the last 24 hours, though, has it? Maybe not intelligent enough.
Well, it is. It hasn't been able to do all the things that we might have done in terms of warning the Ukrainians, and we need to get mobilized to do that. But of course, that hasn't been the case. Unfortunately, the Russians are pounding Ukraine, which is really astonishing when you think about it. It's very worrying, the position of Donald Trump. You know, there are a lot of suggestions that he's an agent of the Russians with this codename Krasnov. And there are a lot of evidence a lot of back stories to support that. Now, I don't know if it is the case.
Well, I mean,
very, very worrying.
People suggest he's an unofficial Russian asset. And I don't think people are seriously thinking the Russians are running the US president.
Well, you know, compromat is a great tool of the Russians, and they've invoked it on a number of people in the past. And I wouldn't be surprised. There are stories. I don't know the truth, but there are stories about it. All
right, Penny, what do you think about what George was saying there about the EU talking big, but actually underpinning it with action for the first time?
Well, look, I have been encouraged by a lot of what I've heard coming out of Europe. I was very struck by Macron's comments regarding extending the nuclear deterrent to protect other European nations. That is highly significant. And they are talking about now the kinds of levels of money that are going to be required, but also critically working together to spend it well. I mean, I still hope that there is a route back into procurement for the US. I think we are stronger together. But if that is not the case, then Europe has been very clear it will stand on its own. So that is good. But we do need to keep this sustained action. And Britain does need to do our bit too. I mean, I say to George, I give full credit both to the Prime Minister and also to the Defence Secretary, John Healey, who I think are doing a very, very good job.
Yep.
But we've got to be frank about what we need to spend in the UK. And it is that additional 20 billion upwards. That's what NATO says needs to be done. And we've got to do it. And the Chancellor's got a big challenge to do that. But if she doesn't do it now, the price we will have to pay in a few years' time will be unbearable. And it will be, I'm afraid, in blood as well as treasure.
Forgive me making a party political point, Penny, but
briefly, if you would, George.
Last time we were at 2.5% was with a Labour government, and it was the 14 years of the Tories that cut it. And I'm glad
you'll have to allow me, Cathy, to come
briefly.
Back and remind George that the size of the black hole, according to RUSI, in the defence budget when we came in 2010 was 71 billion. So
I think there's some apples and pears going on here.
We'll try and get back to the consensus that's required to help Ukraine.